The first time my father-in-law needed me, I was 3 states away. The last time he needed me, I was standing in my own driveway, with the keys already in my hand. That's the difference 11 years makes, if you let it. Harold Michael Doyle never asked anyone for anything twice. He was that kind of man. The kind who fixed his own gutters at 79 because he didn't want to put anybody out. Who drove himself to his wife's chemo appointments for 8 months straight because he said carpooling was for people who couldn't manage their own lives. Who buried my mother-in-law, Dorothy, on a gray October Tuesday, and then went home alone and mowed the lawn, because grief, in his mind, was not an excuse to let the grass get away from you. Love, for Harold, was never a speech. It was a man showing up with a truck and a toolbox before you even finished asking. So when Harold Doyle called me at 6:51 on a Tuesday morning and his voice sounded like gravel dragged through water, I didn't think twice. I didn't calculate. 51 years old, and some part of me still moved the way I did at 22, the day he first shook my hand and told me to take care of his daughter. What I wasn't ready for was the woman standing between me and the front door, and that woman was my wife. Welcome back. If this is your first time here, settle in, because this one's going to sit with you a while. Tell me where you're watching from, down in the comments. And if stories like this mean something to you, go ahead and hit subscribe. It costs you nothing, but it means a great deal to an old man telling stories on the internet. Let me back up and tell you who I am. My name is Robert Callahan. Everybody calls me Bob. I'm 61 years old, retired now from 30 years running the parts counter at a heavy equipment dealership outside Toledo, Ohio. I coach a rec league softball team on Sunday afternoons that I'm not particularly good at coaching, and for 11 years, I have been the kind of husband who mistook silence for peace. I know better now. It took a Tuesday morning in March to teach me, but I know better now. It was March 3rd, 6:51 in the morning. I was in the kitchen, watching the coffee maker do its slow, sputtering thing, half asleep, half thinking about nothing at all, when my phone lit up on the counter. Harold. I picked it up before the second ring finished. Bob. His voice wasn't right. Thin, like something had been let out of it. Harold didn't do thin. This was a man who'd survived 2 heart stents, a tractor rollover in his 40s, and 40 years married to a woman who could out-argue a courtroom, all without so much as raising his voice about it. Harold, you okay? I didn't want to call so early. There it is. 79 years old and still apologizing for existing. Doesn't matter, I said, already walking toward the hallway closet for my jacket. What's going on? My hip. I went down getting out of bed. I think I heard something snap. I can't put weight on it, Bob. A pause, and then, quieter, almost embarrassed. It hurts pretty bad. I'm coming right now, I told him. Don't try to move. Just stay where you are. I hung up and stood there in the hallway, for exactly as long as it took my brain to run through the math. My truck was up on Route 6 at Denny's garage getting the transmission looked at, wouldn't be ready till Thursday at the earliest. My wife's car, a white Lexus SUV she babied like a third child, was sitting in the driveway, gassed up, ready to go. My wife, Carol, was upstairs, and I could hear the shower running, the long kind she took most mornings, the kind that made you wonder if the hot water bill was some kind of personal mission of hers. I went to the bottom of the stairs. Carol, nothing. Carol, the water shut off. A pause that went on a beat too long. What? Not what's wrong. Just what? Flat, already annoyed at being interrupted. I need your car. Harold fell. I think he broke his hip. I need to get to his place now. Silence again, and this silence had a different weight to it than the first. This was the silence of someone deciding how to phrase a no they'd already landed on. She came to the top of the stairs a minute later, towel wrapped around her hair, robe cinched tight, her face doing that thing it did when she'd already made up her mind and was just waiting for me to catch up. Bob, I have the Hendricks closing at 10. I cannot be without my car today. Carol, your father is on the floor of his bathroom right now. He can't stand up. Then call 911. Like it was obvious, like I hadn't thought of it. He hates ambulances, you know that, ever since your mother. Then call somebody else. She was already turning back toward the bedroom door, robe swishing, done with the conversation before I'd even finished having it. I have 3 appointments before noon, and I am not spending my morning sitting in an emergency room over a hip. I stood at the bottom of those stairs and felt something in my chest go very still. Did she really just Carol? My voice came out lower than I expected it to, quieter, which somehow made it carry further. He might have broken his hip. She stopped with her hand on the doorframe, turned halfway around, and looked at me with an expression I have turned over in my mind every day since. Not worry. Not even irritation, really. Inconvenience. Plain and simple, like I'd asked her to reschedule a dentist appointment. He's your father-in-law, Bob, not mine. A beat. You'll figure something out. And then she went into the bedroom and shut the door. Gently, not a slam. A slam might have meant she felt something. This was worse. This was a woman closing a door the same way she'd close a cabinet after putting away the dishes. Like a 79-year-old man alone on a bathroom floor with a possible broken hip was a scheduling inconvenience she simply didn't have room for that week. I stood in that hallway for maybe 4 seconds. Then I pulled out my phone. 2 doors down lived a man named Ray Petrosky, retired Toledo firefighter, 66 years old, drove a 15-year-old Ford F-150 that ran like it was brand new because Ray didn't believe in letting things fall apart around him. He and Harold had known each other going on 18 years, ever since Harold moved into the neighborhood after retiring from the plant. Ray had been a pallbearer at Dorothy's funeral. He picked up on the first ring. "Bobby, what's up?" "Ray, I need a favor. Harold's fallen. Might be his hip. My truck's in the shop. Carol's car isn't available. Can you drive me over there?" Not even half a second of hesitation. "Give me 3 minutes. I'll be out front." That was it. No questions about what not available meant. No need for an explanation. Nothing. 3 minutes. I called Harold back immediately. "I'm on my way," I told him. "Ray's driving me. Don't try to get up, you hear me. Stay right where you are." A pause on the other end, and then, in that same embarrassed voice, "Bobby, I really don't want to be any trouble." "Harold, yeah, stay put, I mean it." A small pained laugh. "Okay, son." Ray pulled up in 2 minutes and 50 seconds. I counted. The drive to Harold's place on Larchmont Avenue took 11 minutes, and I spent every one of them staring out the window, jaw tight, replaying the sound of that bedroom door clicking shut. We found Harold on the bathroom floor exactly where he said he'd be, gray-faced, sweat on his forehead, gripping the edge of the tub. Ray and I got him as comfortable as we could without moving him wrong. And Ray, God bless the man, had his old EMT training kick right back in checking his pulse, keeping him talking, keeping him calm, all while I called 911, because whatever Harold's feelings about ambulances were, a broken hip wasn't a debate. The paramedics got there in 9 minutes. Watching them lift my father-in-law onto that gurney, watching him wince and try to apologize to the 2 young men doing their job, something cold and quiet settled into my chest, right alongside the fear. I didn't examine it yet. I just let it sit there next to everything else. They took him to St. Vincent's on Cherry Street. Ray drove me straight there, no discussion needed, and sat with me through the whole thing like it was simply what a person did. We checked in at 7:44 a.m. A nurse named Patrice, gray-haired, no nonsense, the kind of woman who'd clearly seen every version of every emergency there was, had Harold in a room within 20 minutes. The doctor on call, a younger man named Dr. Awasti, calm-voiced, unhurried in the way that actually made you feel better instead of worse, ordered x-rays right away. "Mr. Doyle," he told Harold, "I want to get imaging done, but based on what you're describing and what I'm seeing, I think we're looking at a hip fracture. We'll know more shortly." Harold looked over at me, and for just a second, the tough old man mask slipped, and underneath it was just a scared man in his 70s, lying on a gurney in a hospital gown. "Do what the doctor says," I told him. He nodded, and then he reached over and gripped my hand. Hard, harder than I expected from a man who'd just fallen. "You came," he said. Simple, almost surprised, like some part of him hadn't been sure. "Of course I came, Harold," I said. "I'll always come." He squeezed my hand once more and let his eyes close. I sat in that waiting room for 2 hours and 20 minutes. Hard plastic chairs, a TV bolted to the wall playing a home renovation show with the sound off, vending machine coffee that tasted like it had personally offended somebody on its way through the machine. My phone sat on my knee the whole time. Carol didn't text once. Not "how is he?" Not, let me know. Nothing. At 10:04, Dr. Awasti came out to find me. Mr. Callahan, he said, it is a fracture, as we suspected. The good news is, it's a clean break, and given his overall health, he's actually an excellent candidate for surgery. We'd like to operate tomorrow morning. He'll need to stay with us until then. Is he in a lot of pain? We've got that managed, he assured me. He's stable, and honestly, he's asking the nurses a lot of questions about the Tiger's bullpen, so I'd say his spirits are intact. I laughed, actually laughed, right there in that hallway. That's him, all right. Can I see him? Give us 15 minutes to get him settled. I sat back down, elbows on my knees, and thought about the word Carol had used. Figure something out. While Harold Doyle lay on a bathroom floor in real pain, while paramedics lifted him onto a gurney, while a doctor told me my father-in-law needed surgery she'd had 3 closings to get to. I figured something out, all right. I called Ray, who'd been sitting out in the parking lot the whole time rather than leave, exactly the kind of thing Ray would do without being asked. He's stable, I told him. Surgery tomorrow morning. Thank God, Ray said, and I could hear that he meant every word of it. Ray, I don't know how to thank you for this. His voice went firm, gentle, like this was somehow a strange thing for me to be thanking him for it all. Bobby. That's just what people do. I let that sentence sit in my chest for a long moment after we hung up. Some people. I stayed with Harold until visiting hours wound down that evening. We watched part of a Tigers game together, him narrating the bullpen situation with more passion than I think he'd shown about anything in months, and for a little while it was easy between us. The kind of easy that only exists between two people who've spent a couple decades learning how to sit in a room together without needing to fill it up with talk. Around 7, just before I had to head out, he took hold of my hand again. His voice had changed. That thin, scared morning voice was gone, and in its place was something steadier, something with weight behind it. Bobby. Yeah, Harold. Carol didn't come. It wasn't a question. I didn't answer right away. I told him. She had appointments. Just my name, that's all he said. That's all he needed to say. I looked at him, 79 years old, hospital blanket pulled up to his waist, eyes still sharp despite everything the day had put him through, and I told him the truth, quiet and plain. She had closings, Harold. All day. He didn't gasp, didn't raise his voice, didn't say one single unkind word about his daughter. He just nodded, slow, and turned his head toward the window, where the last of the daylight was hitting the parking lot in that flat orange way March light does. He didn't say anything else. But I saw something cross his face, something that looked an awful lot like a decision being made. I left the hospital that night and drove home with Ray in a silence that didn't need filling. Somewhere on Airport Highway, watching the streetlights slide across the windshield, I realized I wasn't angry at Carol anymore. Anger takes energy and hope, honestly, both of which I found I was completely out of. I was just done. If you've been with me a while, do me one favor. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. It doesn't cost you a thing, but for an old man sitting here telling you these stories, it means quite a bit, and drop a comment. I read every one. Some people spend a whole marriage making withdrawals from a bank they never once made a deposit into. Carol had been overdrawn for a long time. I just hadn't wanted to look at the statement. Wednesday morning, 6:40, I woke up before the alarm went off, which is how you know something's been sitting on your chest all night that sleep couldn't quite move out of the way. Carol was still asleep beside me, breathing slow and even, completely undisturbed, like the world hadn't tilted at all the day before. I got up quiet, went down, made coffee, the loud grinder, the whole production, and no, I didn't feel one bit guilty about the noise. She'd chosen 3 real estate closings over her own father's broken hip. She could survive a coffee grinder. I sat at the kitchen table and watched the gray morning come up slow over the backyard fence. My phone sat face down on the table. I flipped it. Nothing from St. Vincent's overnight. No news is good news, I told myself, and thought about Harold in that hospital bed, the way he'd looked smaller somehow under those blankets, the way he'd said. You came like it had genuinely been a question in his mind right up until I walked through the door. 2 words. 79 years of a life spent never asking for help, compressed down into 2 words, and they nearly took the legs out from under me sitting right there at that kitchen table with my coffee going cold in my hands. I heard Carol on the stairs a few minutes later. She came into the kitchen in her robe, glanced at me, then at the coffee maker, then back at me. "You made coffee," she said, like it was some kind of event. "Same as every morning for 11 years, I said. "Didn't realize that still surprised you." She poured herself a cup, leaned back against the counter. There was a silence between us, the specific kind that only exists between two married people, the kind that's waiting on somebody to finally say the thing out loud. She got there first. "How's Dad?" Not "how's my father?" Not "how's your dad?" "How's Dad?" but flat, distant, the way you'd ask about a coworker's weekend. "Broken hip," I said. "Surgery tomorrow morning. He's staying at St. Vincent's till then." She repeated it back slow, like she was testing the words in her mouth for the first time. "How were your closings?" I asked. She blinked just once, but I caught it. "They went fine," she said carefully. "Bob, I want you to understand that yesterday was genuinely a hard day for me to move around." "Hard," I repeated. I let it hang there between us a moment. "Your father was lying on a bathroom floor, unable to stand up, and you had a hard day." She started. "Bob Carroll." I said her name the way Harold had said mine the night before, flat and final. Just the name, nothing behind it. She stopped talking. "I'm not doing this right now," I told her. "I'm just trying to explain. I heard you yesterday," I said. "At the bottom of the stairs." I heard every word of it the first time. I stood up, rinsed out my mug, and set it in the rack. Then I grabbed my jacket and my spare truck keys off the hook. "Where are you going?" she asked. "To see Harold," I said, and I didn't turn around. Ray drove me again, no questions. Old classic rock playing low on the radio, the kind of quiet between two men that doesn't need filling because it was never empty to begin with. We got to St. Vincent's a little after 8:30. "I'll be out here," Ray said. "Ray, you don't have to sit in a parking lot all morning." "Bobby," he said, looking at me over the top of his glasses. "I'll be here. Some people show up. You take note of who they are, and you don't forget it." Harold was sitting up when I walked in, color better in his face. That thin, scared voice from the night before completely gone. He'd talked the nurses into letting him keep his own robe on instead of the hospital gown, which honestly didn't surprise me one bit, and he had his reading glasses pushed up on his nose, working a crossword puzzle from the newspaper folded on his tray table. "6 letters," he said, without even looking up. "Disloyal." I stopped dead in the doorway and just stared at him. He glanced up over his glasses with a face so straight I nearly believed he meant it innocently. "For the crossword, Bobby." I laughed harder than I had in longer than I could remember. Laughed enough that a nurse poked her head in to see what was going on. "Disloyal," I said, dropping into the chair by his bed. "Disloyal." He counted the letters, filled it in with a satisfied little nod. "You always were quick," he said. "I'm your only son-in-law, Harold. And still the quick one." We sat like that a while, easy, unhurried. The kind of quiet that two people who trust each other completely don't feel any need to interrupt. He finished a few more clues. I drank the worst hospital coffee I'd ever had in my life and didn't say a word about it, because sitting there in that plastic chair next to that man was exactly where I wanted to be and nowhere else. Then he set the crossword down on the tray table, folded his hands, and looked at me with an expression I'd learned to recognize over 18 years as Harold Doyle, getting ready to say something he'd already made peace with. "Here's the thing, Bobby," he said. "I want to call Walter this morning. Walter Simmons. Attorney, offices on Monroe Street, practicing law in Toledo for going on 33 years. He'd handled Dorothy's estate when the time came. He'd drawn up Harold's will 4 years back, right after. A careful man, Walter, precise, the kind of lawyer who let you finish your sentence before he started forming his answer, which in my experience is a rarer trait in that profession than you'd think." I kept my voice level. "Okay," I said. "I've been thinking on it," he said, "since last night." "Harold, you don't have to Robert Michael Callahan," he said, the full name landing like a hand on my shoulder. I hadn't heard my middle name out of that man's mouth since the week I married his daughter. "Let me finish." I shut my mouth. He looked at me, steady, clear-eyed despite the hospital bed and the IV line taped to the back of his hand, the March light coming soft through the window behind him, making him look somehow younger, or maybe just exactly like himself. "I worked 41 years at that plant," he said quietly. "Dorothy and I scrimped, saved, went without more times than either of us ever told anybody about, so that what we built together would matter. So it would end up in the hands of somebody who understood what it means to actually show up for people." A pause. "To the people who show up, I didn't say a word." "Carol didn't show up, Bobby," he said. "I know, Harold. Not yesterday." He picked the newspaper back up, not to work the crossword, just to have something in his hands. "Not when her mother was in that hospice bed those last 6 weeks and I was the one sitting there every single night. Not when I had my knee replaced and needed rides for 3 months of physical therapy. And not yesterday, when I was on my bathroom floor unable to stand up." She had closings. Every single thing he named landed like a stone dropped into still water, slow, deliberate, sinking all the way down, because he was right about every one of them. And I'd spent years quietly making excuses for the woman I married, telling myself she just showed love differently, telling myself work was just how she coped. "I'm not angry, son," he said, and the remarkable thing was, he genuinely wasn't. His voice stayed level the entire time, steady as a hand resting flat on a table. "I'm just done pretending I don't see what I see." He reached over to the little table beside the bed, found a slip of paper tucked inside his wallet, a phone number written out in his own careful, deliberate handwriting. Walter Simmons, direct line. He'd come prepared, which told me this had been building in him a great deal longer than one fall in a bathroom. "You want me to step out?" I asked. He thought about it for a second. "No," he said. "Stay." One word, and something in my chest went very still and very grateful all at once. He dialed at 9:16. Walter picked up on the second ring. "Walter Simmons." "Walter, it's Harold Doyle. Hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "Mr. Doyle," his voice warmed right up. "Never a bad time for you. How are you doing?" "I'm actually in the hospital," he said. "Street. Vincent's. Broke my hip yesterday." A brief pause on Walter's end. "I'm very sorry to hear that." "Serious?" "Serious enough to make a man think clearly," Harold said. And even lying flat in a hospital bed the morning after breaking his hip, there was a dignity in his voice that no amount of pain could touch. The kind of dignity you only get from a lifetime spent doing the right thing, even on the days it costs you something. "Walter, I need to make some changes to my will," he said. Silence, on the other end, professional silence, a man absorbing information rather than reacting to it. "Of course," Walter said. "Do you want me to come to you, or today, if you're able?" Harold said. "I have some very specific changes in mind." "I can be there by 2, Walter told him. "Perfect," Harold said. "My son-in-law will be here with me." "Very good, sir. I'll see you at 2. He hung up, set the phone down on the tray table, and picked the crossword back up like nothing at all had just happened, like he hadn't just loved his daughter and rejected her dishonesty in the very same breath. I sat there a moment, throat tight, eyes steady but only just. "Harold," I said, my voice coming out quieter than I'd meant it to, "you don't have to do this on my account." He didn't even look up from the puzzle. "I'm not doing it on your account, Bobby," he said. "I've earned the right to decide where my life's work goes, and I've decided." He looked up over his glasses. "Any questions?" I had roughly a dozen. I asked exactly none. "No, sir." "Good," he said, and went back to the crossword. "Now go find me something edible in that cafeteria." Whatever they served me for breakfast tasted like a decision somebody regretted the moment they made it. Walter Simmons arrived at 1:58 that afternoon. Gray suit, leather briefcase, the kind of handshake that told you he understood the weight of the rooms he walked into. He sat down beside Harold's bed with a legal pad and a pen, and I took a chair in the corner, quiet, a witness, and nothing more. Their conversation ran 40 minutes. I won't repeat every word of it here. Some things are entitled to their privacy, but I will tell you this. By the time Walter clicked his pen shut and slid that legal pad back into his briefcase, the document Carol Callahan had spent years quietly assuming would come to her one day had been completely and legally rewritten. The house on Larchmont Avenue, paid off outright since 2011. The retirement accounts Harold and Dorothy had built dollar by careful dollar over 4 decades. Dorothy's jewelry, the 1969 Chevrolet Camaro sitting under a canvas cover in Harold's garage, the one he and Dorothy had bought used the year they got married and that he'd kept running perfectly every single year since. The one that still smelled faintly of her perfume if you opened the door on a warm afternoon. And $15,000, earmarked specifically for the Lucas County Veterans Outreach Center on Dorr Street, because Harold had volunteered there every other Saturday for going on 12 years, driving other veterans to appointments they couldn't get to on their own, because that's exactly the kind of man he was. Carol's name appeared in that document exactly 0 times. "You'll figure something out," somebody had said to me the day before. Turns out, she'd been right about that, just not the way she meant it. When Walter stood to leave, he shook my hand at the door and glanced back at Harold, already lost again in his crossword, unbothered, entirely himself. "Your father-in-law," he said quietly, "is one of the sharpest men I've dealt with in 33 years of practicing law." "I know," I said. "I've always known that." Ray picked me up at 4:30. He read my face the way old friends do, not digging for details, just checking that I was still upright. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Yeah," I told him quietly. "Everything's exactly the way it ought to be." He nodded, put the truck in gear, and we pulled out toward home. My phone stayed silent in my pocket the whole ride. Carol hadn't called once all day. She had no idea, not the first idea, but she would. Thursday morning, 7:52. I was standing at the counter at Denny's garage on Route 6 signing off on the transmission work, a new alternator belt thrown in for free, because Denny and I had known each other since our boys played Pop Warner together 20 years back, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. "Carol." I let it ring, not out of any strategy. I just genuinely didn't have anything to say to her yet, nothing that would land the way it needed to. Not yet. I finished signing the paperwork, shook Denny's hand, and walked out into a cold, gray Ohio morning that felt, for the first time in longer than I could remember, completely honest. I sat in my truck, letting the engine warm, watching my breath fog up the windshield, and thought about Harold, about his surgery scheduled for that morning, about getting him settled back at Larchmont Avenue, eventually, tea the way he liked it, his crossword, his dignity fully intact. That's what the day was about. Not Carol, not the calls. My phone buzzed again. Carol, then again, then a third time, then a fourth. Something's happening, I thought, and pulled out of Denny's lot heading for St. Vincent's, because Harold's surgery would be done by now and I had a father-in-law to check on. The surgery had gone well clean, no complications, Dr. Awasti told me. Recovery would take time, but Harold's overall health gave him good odds. I sat with him in recovery a while, watched him drift in and out, groggy but himself, cracking half a joke about the anesthesiologist's tie the second his eyes opened enough to focus. By the time I left that evening, my phone showed 14 missed calls. Carol, Carol, Carol. I didn't call back. I drove home, walked in, and found her sitting on the edge of the living room couch, still in her work clothes, both hands wrapped around her phone like it was the last solid thing left in the house. She looked up the second the door opened. Her eyes were red, sleepless looking, and something in her face had cracked open in a way I hadn't seen in 11 years of marriage. The careful composure she wore like a second skin had come apart somewhere in the last day, and underneath it was a woman who'd finally started to understand exactly what she'd done. "Bob," she said, standing up fast. "I've been calling you all day." "I know," I said. I set my keys on the hook by the door and thought about Tuesday morning, about Harold on that bathroom floor, about the paramedics lifting him onto the gurney, about Ray sitting in a hospital parking lot for hours without being asked twice, and about Carol passing paperwork across a closing table while her own father lay on cold tile, unable to stand. I let that sit in my chest for exactly 1 second, and then I looked at my wife. "Did you know?" I asked. "About the will. Did you know he was going to do this?" "No, Bob," she said, her voice cracking. "I swear I didn't know. I found out the same way everybody else did." She pressed her fingers against her mouth, tried to gather herself. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, more controlled, but underneath it, threaded through every word, was real fear now. The kind that only shows up once consequences finally catch up with choices already made. He cut me out completely. Bob. Walter's office called to confirm the filing, and you understand what that means? Everything we were counting on. Carol. My voice came out steady, steadier than I'd expected. I understand exactly what it means. Then talk to him, she said. That composure, slipping further. Tell him it was a misunderstanding, that I would have come if I'd really understood how serious it was, that You just what? I said. She stopped. I took a step toward her, not angry, not raising my voice, just present, more present than I think I'd been in that house in years, because I finally had nothing left in me that needed protecting. You had 3 closings, I said, while your father was lying on a bathroom floor with a broken hip. While I was sitting in a hospital waiting room drinking coffee I couldn't taste. While Ray Petrosky sat in a parking lot for 3 hours because that's simply what decent people do for each other. The color drained out of her face, slow, completely, like water leaving a glass. Harold made his decision, I told her, the same way you made yours. Clearly, deliberately, without asking anybody's permission first. Bob, please, she said. He spent 79 years showing up. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. For your mother, for me, for every single person he's ever loved in his life. He has never once chosen a closing over somebody who needed him. I looked at her for a long moment. He just finally stopped waiting around for you to do the same. The living room went completely silent. Carol looked at me, really looked, maybe for the first time in years, and I watched something move across her face that went past fear, into something deeper, the specific look of a person finally understanding the full size of what they'd actually lost. Not the house, not the Camaro, me. She understood, right there in that moment, that she'd lost me, and the man standing in front of her, calm, clear-eyed, keys still in his hand. He was not the same man who'd stood at the bottom of those stairs Tuesday morning, still half hoping she'd say yes. That man was gone, and he wasn't coming back. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced down at it. Harold's name lit up on the screen. She looked back up at me, eyes wide, something in them that might have been hope. I held her gaze for exactly 1 second, and felt the last thread of something I'd been holding onto for 11 years finally go slack. Not with anger, with something quieter than that. Relief, maybe. I picked my keys back up off the hook. I'm going to go check on your father, I said, and I opened the front door. The cold March air hit me clean and honest, and I turned back once. Carol stood in the middle of that living room, phone glowing in her hand, her father's name still lit up on the screen, 14 missed calls worth of consequence written into every line on her face. You should probably answer that, I told her, and I shut the door behind me. I stood on that porch a minute, just breathing, the kind of breath that comes from somewhere so far down you didn't even realize you'd been holding it that long. The cold hit my face clean and true, and something settled over me I hadn't felt in a very long time. Not anger, not bitterness either. Just clarity, the plain, quiet clarity of a man who'd finally stopped telling himself things were fine and looked at his life exactly as it was. I hadn't been married for 11 years. I'd been enduring for 11 years, and those two things only look alike from a distance. I walked to my truck, sat behind the wheel, a moment before starting it. Somewhere down the line where a man knows a thing before he's ready to put words to it, I already understood this wasn't going to be one bad night we'd talk through and move past. It was going to be the rest of my life, live differently, starting right there in that driveway. I started the engine, and I drove to see Harold, because that's exactly where I belonged. If a story like this one meant something to you tonight, do an old man a favor and hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you on the next one.